Who's the Beatdown is a fundamental aspect of Magic the Gathering gameplay strategy. So if you've never read this article or even heard of this article, let's dive right in. So a quick editor's note here to the Star City Games posting for this article. A long time ago, the first Magic website was The Dojo, a site that is still legendary for publishing some of the most fundamental principles of Magic. Almost all strategical theory can be traced back to the Dojo's loyal writers, and any serious Magic player owes these old vets a debt of gratitude. Unfortunately, thanks to financial troubles, the dojo went out of business in 2000. In a last-ditch effort to save the 4 years of wisdom that had been collected there at the time, the editor asked the community to archive the articles for future reference. The best of the dojo articles are reprinted here because they're still vital to Magic today. StarCityGames.com merely reprints them, adding links to clarify older cards that new players probably won't have seen so that they can understand some of the strategy. Many of the dojo's writers are still active in Magic and write for other sites. Give them a shout out for helping the community grow. Who's the Beatdown? By Mike Flores. Originally published January 1, 1999. The most common yet subtle yet disastrous mistake I see in tournament Magic is the misalignment of who is the beatdown deck and who is the control deck in a similar deck versus similar deck matchup. The player who misaligns himself is inevitably the loser. You see, in similar deck versus similar deck matchups, unless the decks are really symmetrical, i.e. the true mirror match, one deck has to play the role of beatdown and the other deck has to play the role of control. This can be a very serious dilemma if, say, both are playing aggressive decks. Let me give you an example. At a 1.x PTQ in Washington, D.C., my teammate Al Tran was playing for a top 8 slot versus Sly. Al was playing Land D Ho's White Weenie Jank deck, normally an aggressive deck, but not against Sly. The matchup was split 1-1, and the third game was going to determine who made top 8. Al's opponent was first and laid a Jackal Pup. At this point, Al had 2 Cursed Scrolls, 2 Swords to Plowshares, an Honorable Passage, and some land in hand. Al chose not to plow the Jackal Pup, taking 2 on the first attack. His opponent played another Pup. Al didn't plow either, waiting on Scroll mana, or a Lightning Bolt. On his own second turn, Al played another land and a Cursed Scroll, so he only had 1 land up. On his opponent's third turn, you guessed it, another mountain came down, followed by Ball Lightning. Al was forced to plow the ball. He gained control over the next few turns, but ended up dying to bolts. What was the problem here? Al was a beatdown deck, and he wanted to deal damage to his opponent via the Jackal Pups. However, in this particular matchup, he had to play the control deck. You see, Sly is just much faster than Jank, so Jank's way to win has to be stifling Sly's early speed with removal, and then locking down the mid-game with Cursed Scrolls. Because Sly also has Cursed Scrolls, as well as more bolts than Jank, the only way that Jank can win is to make sure it has decent life total as it plays its own threat cards. Though it ostensibly hurts the initial race to give the Sly player 4 additional life from the Jackal Pups, you can see from this example that Al had to give him 6 more life from the Ball Lightning, and still took at least 8 from the Jackal Pups before he could control them. It would have profited Al much more to plow the pups, passage the ball, and enter the mid-game with 20 life as he started to threaten with his own paladins, priests, etc. The same comparison can be made when 2 control decks slug it out. At the same PTQ, I was playing High Tide against what is normally a dangerous matchup for me, Counter Sliver. My opponent was running the usual array of slivers, Worship, and Permission, as well as Cursed Scroll. He made the mistake of thinking he was the control deck. After playing a turn 2 Crystalline Sliver, he followed up 2 turns later with Worship, so I stroked him out. I killed him the first game with Palancron, and because I mostly showed him some disrupts, 4 spikes, card drawing, he may have thought I was more creature heavy. It doesn't matter. He thought he was the control deck in this matchup when clearly I was the control deck. I had a comparable or greater amount of permission, but where he had slivers, I had card drawing and deck manipulation. Where he had dual lands, I had thawing glaciers. My thaws were going to ensure that I never missed a land drop. I had already housed a couple of his brainstorms with Disrupt. This means that I was going to win the long game every single time. His job, therefore, was to kill me before I killed him. The normal formula is to play some decent-sized slivers, 2 power or more, attacking every turn and leaving mana open to try to counter whatever the opposing blue deck does that might be threatening. You know, a Wrath of God, an Engineered Plague, or, in this case, a High Tide finishing combo. First of all, he probably should have tried to threaten me more aggressively. Only 1 crystalline gives me a lot of turns of thawing and card drawing. Secondly, tapping out is the death knell. I didn't even have to waste a turnabout on him. In similar deck versus similar deck matchups, there are a couple of things that you want to look at to figure out what role to play. Number 1, who has more damage? Usually he has to be the beatdown deck. Number 2, who has more removal? Usually he has to be the control deck. And number 3, who has more permission in card drawing? Almost always he has to be the control deck. If you are the beatdown deck, you have to kill your opponent faster than he can kill you. If you are the control deck, you have to weather the early beatdown and get into a position where you can gain card advantage. For an example of correctly determining who is the beatdown deck and who is the control deck, look at the Sly versus Sly matchup between Price and Pacifico at the top 8 of the 1998 US Nationals. Although on the surface, the two players seem to be playing very similar decks, there are major design differences. Dave's deck was running more Cursed Scrolls than Pacifico's, and he also had Hammer of Bogarden and Fireslinger. His only real beatdown was Jackal Pup and Ball Lightning. The rest of the deck was more control and utility oriented. Pacifico's deck was much more damage oriented. It was based around attacking and celerity creatures instead of dedicated removal. In addition to Jackal Pup and Ball Lightning, he had Goblin Vandal, Mog Flunkies, Sequata Lancer, and Viashino Sandstalker. Furthermore, Pacifico's deck lacked Fireslinger and Hammer of Bogarden and ran only 3 Cursed Scrolls. While Dave's deck could definitely get a quick start, in this matchup, his deck was the control deck, set up for the long game. In one duel, Dave just played a land and scrolls and did very little else. He started by removing Pacifico's creatures with blocks or bolts, and then scroll locked him, gained a little card advantage, and finished the game. Had Dave tried to race Pacifico, he might not have won. When two players are just blindly throwing their creatures into one another, the one with more damage-oriented cards is going to win the race, but I figured we expect good Sly play from the King of Red. Finally, think about the Suicide Black versus Sly matchup. Those are both very fast beatdown decks. Sly invariably wins. Which deck has more damage? Suicide Black. It runs many high power-to-cost creatures like Carnophage, Sarcomancy, and sometimes Flesh Reaver. Sometimes it has stuff like Hatred. It damages even itself. Which deck has more removal? Sly. If Suicide Black even runs Cursed Scrolls, the Sly deck can invariably match them. Moreover, the Sly deck just has not just weenies, but bolts. Though Sly is very fast, Goldfish around turn 4, Suicide Black can Goldfish on turn 2 or 3, depending on the version and the ritual draw. Clearly, the Suicide Black deck has to be the beatdown deck, and the Sly deck has to be the control deck. However, Suicide Black can't afford to be the beatdown deck. It can't lay many of its clocks, especially Sarcomancy or Flesh Reaver, because the Sly deck has so many bolts. It can almost never cast a Hatred for fear of auto loss to an Incinerate. So if it can't really beat down, the Suicide Black deck has to try to be the control deck. Anyone who has ever witnessed this matchup, at least when the Sly deck gets a decent draw, knows how well control-oriented Suicide Black turns out. Misalignment of role equals game loss. After sideboarding, the Suicide Black deck has traditionally done much better, but taking out a lot of its Damage Myself cards for creature removal and life gaining, it can play the control role more adequately, and has a much improved, if not great, chance of winning. So what can we take away from the Who's the Beatdown article here in 2024. Some similar decks that I could see facing up against each other would be, at least in standard, mono blue bounce, or even possibly 2 red deck wins decks, just hurling bolts like passing ships in the night. So if you find yourself playing a, maybe not a direct mirror match, but at least a similar archetype matchup, you've got to start asking, do I have more damage spells? Do I have more removal spells? Do I have more permission and card drawing? If you do have the ability to deal more direct damage, then go ahead, take the aggressive role, be the beatdown deck, and bring your clock down to as short a time span as possible. If you've got the more removal, permission, and card drawing, then slow it down, get rid of those big threats as best you can, and play the control deck role. Lately in Standard in 2024, I've seen 2 variants of red deck wins. One that is more of just a hasty, hit the ground running, very fast clock, but also go wide with creatures. Or the prowessy build, stick 1, maybe 2 good threats that can trigger off the prowess, and then back those up with your instant and sorceries, triggering the prowess. And without the perfect knowledge of knowing exactly what's in your opponent's deck, you're just going to have to make your best guess. Did your opening hand have 1 or 2 card draw spells? Or is it a little heavier on the removal and direct damage spells? If you're looking at a hand that has 2 or 3 direct-to-player damage spells, try the beatdown route. If you're staring at something that's a little more deck manipulation, filtering off the top of the deck, slow it down, play the control route. But regardless, if you are playing the beatdown deck or the control route, if your Magic the Gathering paper collection needs more cards, make sure to hop over to valhalla-cards.com to shop our vast inventory of Magic the Gathering cardboard. Our goal is to ship out the cards and get them in your hands and onto your battlefields as fast as possible. Until next time, peace out.